I'm Mark Mercer, and this is Introduction to University, a series of lectures, A Professor's Career. Now, you may remember way back, Lecture 2, we talked about what it is to be a professor. A professor has three responsibilities: research, teaching, and service. And I said that being a professor is, above all, to engage in play. It's like being a musician, an artist, a comedian, or an athlete. Agonistic and ludic. Agonistic, it involves challenges. Ludic, we do it for the sake of fun. Being a professor involves voluntarily assuming the challenge of living up to standards of excellence, and one does it because it's enjoyable. But being a professor is also a job and also a career. It comes with steady pay, job protections, and access to resources. It also involves tedious or draining responsibilities. Now, it's a good thing that being a professor is a steady, well-paying job, for it would not be easy to engage the world as an intellectual only in one's leisure time and without institutional support. Those people who manage to participate in discussions, to read and write papers and books, and otherwise to engage in the life of the mind outside universities and apart from remuneration should command every professor's admiration. So we talked previously about what it's like to be a professor. Now I'm going to talk about it as a job. What are the elements of being a professor as a job, as a career? Being a professor is a steady job for many professors, but not for all. For many, being a professor is a gig job. They get paid for teaching only for a period of time, or perhaps even just for single courses. I'm not going to talk about professors who are in the gig economy in this lecture. I'm going to talk about the regular professors, the ones who are tenured or on the tenure track, and I'll try to explain what those terms mean. But do remember that not all professors have a steady source of income. Many are hired by universities on part-time or per-course basis. So what is a professor's job? What's the shape of a professor's career? As I described in the second lecture in this series, the three parts of a professor's undertaking are research, teaching, and service. Professors pursue research, interpretation, inquiry, or scholarship. They help apprentice intellectuals acquire the skills, knowledge, and attitudes useful to hard thought, and they help to promote intellectual life within and beyond their home universities. Now, most significant for these three for a professor's career within the university as an institution is research. Just in that a professor who is publishing good articles or books is unlikely to be denied tenure or promotion, even if his or her teaching or service is substandard. Good teaching can save a professor who's an unproductive or poor researcher, though given the nature of university teaching, one has to be engaged in research to teach competently. Typically, professors are evaluated by their colleagues 4 or 5 times during their careers. Their colleagues will evaluate their research, their teaching, and their service with an eye toward deciding about hiring, tenure, or promotion. So let's look at these 3 areas. Hiring. Typically, a new professor or professor on the job market has a PhD, and that means they probably have a master's and a BA as well, at least 9 years then of schooling. In most cases, it's 10, 11, or 12 years of schooling when they come onto the job market. They present themselves and their dossier to the department. They'll give 1 or 2 talks, perhaps a professional talk in their area of active research, almost certainly a presentation meant to show that they're good teachers. They must make a case to the hiring committee that they're excellent researchers and teachers, and that they will assume without fuss and successfully discharge the burdens of service. So hiring is the first evaluation. Second evaluation, so when you're hired, let's say we're hired on the tenure track. A professor who is tenured, who earns tenure, then is a permanent professor and cannot be fired except for incompetence or failing to show up to class, things like that. So a professor's on the tenure track. 3 years into the tenure track, the professor must then submit a dossier for consideration. If all goes well, then the professor has 2 more years. So in the 5th year, the professor applies for tenure. This means submitting a full dossier. It goes out to professors from another institution who will report on the dossier. It comes back to the department. The members of the department look at the dossier. They look at the evaluation by their colleagues from a different department, a different institution. It goes to the dean. It goes to the academic vice president, who oversees a committee. And if that committee is satisfied by the recommendations along the way, then the professor is granted tenure. So that 5-year period is the period on which during which the professor is on probation. The professor has a probationary contract for 3 years. If successful, the probationary contract is renewed for 2 more years. Now, if the professor does not receive tenure, well, a number of things can happen. One is that the university can continue the probationary contract for a 6th or perhaps a 7th year, but most often that means that's the end of the professor's career at that institution. The professor won't be hired for a 6th year if the professor fails to attain tenure at his or her university. The department, first of all, recommends that the professor receive tenure, or recommends that the professor not receive tenure. That's then taken to the dean, who makes his or her recommendation, and then to the committee chaired by the academic vice president. Now, it rarely happens, but it can happen that both the department and the dean recommend tenure, but the committee fails to do so. So it's not a done thing until the committee under the vice president academic says that tenure has been granted. So the first evaluation comes with hiring. Second evaluation, the dossier to extend the probationary contract, and then finally an evaluation to determine whether the professor is worthy of tenure. When a professor applies for tenure, most often that professor also applies for promotion. It's not necessary. Sometimes a professor will wait a year or 2 after tenure to apply for promotion. And sometimes if a professor is coming to an institution from another institution where they've built up a body of work, where they've already acquired a reputation, they might apply for promotion early. They might apply for promotion during their time under a probationary contract. But usually tenure and promotion at the same time. Now, what's the difference? There's tenure and promotion. The idea is that tenure is forward-looking. A professor is granted tenure if, in the estimation of those evaluating that professor, this professor promises to do good work at teaching and research in the future. So looking at the professor's dossier, the professor's plans for future research, the committee decides, yes, this is a person who will do good things. Let's grant this professor tenure. Tenure is forward-looking. Promotion, on the other hand, is backward-looking. We gain tenure for what we will do. We're promoted for what we have done. We are promoted if the body of work that we've generated in those 5 years, well, those 4 years, we're applying in the 5th year, if the body of work that we've created in the time that we've been at the university is substantial and merits are being promoted. Tenure, forward-looking; promotion, backward-looking. If there's promotion, then there are ranks. We're promoted from something to something. So let's say our imaginary professor, let's call her Sally. Let's suppose that Sally has done well and has applied for tenure and has received tenure. Sally began her career at the university as an assistant professor. Now, assistant doesn't mean she's assisting anyone, right? She's a professor. She's doing her work as an individual, as all the other professors are. It's just the name of that particular rank. So Sally begins as an assistant professor. When she applies for promotion, she's applying for promotion to associate professor. That's the general term. Now, different universities, different names for the different ranks, but this is standard. If a university doesn't have the rank assistant professor or associate professor, then that's eccentric. That's an unusual system at the university. This is pretty well standard in at least the English-speaking world. You remain an assistant professor for 5 years, and in your 5th year, you apply for promotion along with applying for tenure. And if you're successful, if the department and the other evaluators think that indeed you've contributed a substantial body of work in your 5 years, you're promoted to associate professor. The rules are that you stay at the rank of associate professor for 8 years. 5 years as an assistant professor, or 6 or 7 if you apply for promotion later after your 5th year. 5 years as an assistant professor, 8 years as an associate professor. In your 8th year, or more often in your 9th or 10th years, professors often taken 1 or 2 extra years to build their reputation, to create an even more substantial body of work, but at least 8 years as an associate professor, you apply for promotion to professor. Now, to distinguish professor from assistant professor and associate professor, and the common use of the word professor for any professor, it's sometimes called full professor. Right? One's a full professor. After 8 years, you apply for promotion to full professor. Now, just as the promotion to assistant professor requires the submission of a substantial dossier of your work, a dossier that's taken to external referees and then back to the department, same with associate professor, same with full professor. The external referees who look at your dossier when you're applying to be a full professor will themselves be full professors and not professors at lower ranks. So they provide their report on your dossier. They make recommendations. Your department then gets together, reads your dossier, reads the reports from the external evaluators, sends its recommendation. Yes, this person deserves to be promoted to professor. No, this person doesn't deserve to be promoted to professor. To the dean, then to the committee chaired by the academic vice president. So it's a long process. 8 years, one applies to become a professor, and it's not terribly unusual for an associate professor to fail to be promoted to professor on first try. Sometimes the dean or sometimes even the department says, no, this body of work is not substantial enough to honor with the promotion to professor. And then you remain a professor for the rest of your career until you retire. There's one more evaluation that one might undertake. When you retire, say Sally retires. Sally waited till she was in her 10th year as an associate professor to apply for professor. She was granted her promotion. She's now a professor. Many years have gone by. She's decided it's time to retire. She's going to retire, but she puts in for Professor Emerita. Emerita for women, emeritus for men. She applies for this, it goes to the department, then it goes up again. Now, the designation, Professor Emeritus, is just an honorific, right? It doesn't come with anything. In fact, you get it because you've retired. Some think that it's a way of honoring the professor, but I don't. I think it's a way of honoring the university by saying that the university was a place hospitable to the pursuits, the intellectual pursuits of this professor. And so the designating the professor an emeritus professor is a way of the university honoring itself. But those are the steps in a professor's career. We have the 3 ranks: assistant, associate, and professor. Now, I want to finish by talking a little bit about tenure. What is tenure all about? The point of tenure is to protect academic freedom and to protect the intellectual integrity of a professor. A tenured professor may hold unpopular views either in their area of research or about anything else, politics, culture, without fearing loss of his or her job. A tenured professor may teach in unorthodox ways, but the institution of tenure is only as good at protecting academic freedom as the culture of a university allows it to be. University administrators, sometimes egged on by mobs of professors and students, have been known to brush tenure aside to get rid of a professor they don't like. Faculty unions have been known to give academic freedom the cold shoulder in favor of, say, social justice causes. So to recap, a scholar's research, teaching, and service is evaluated first at hiring, second at renewal, third at tenure, fourth at promotion to associate professor, but that might be at the same time as tenure, and then 5th at promotion to professor. Finally, at one's request to be designated an emeritus professor, one's work will be evaluated again. Now, professors also have to submit annual reports to their departments and deans, but that's a way in which the deans and others can see whether the professor is on track. Now, it can and it does happen that universities hire the wrong people or make bad decisions about tenure and promotion. Why do the processes of evaluation sometimes go wrong? One way they can go wrong is the tendency of some members of university communities to consider in their evaluations non-academic factors, such as race, sex, ethnicity, cultural affiliation, disability, or sexual orientation. At a university serious about its academic mission, all academic decisions will be made on academic grounds only. But another way hiring and promotion go wrong is by counting the number of a professor's publications rather than assessing their quality. Some members of committees are keen on counting publications or committees served on rather than reading the publications or judging the value of what the committees have produced. Things can go south when academic administrators above the level of dean, the faculty, want to get involved. That too can result in bad judgments. The general problem is that administrators and unions and others, they prefer that there be clear and distinct criteria and that candidates be evaluated against clear and distinct criteria set down in documents. But the preference for criteria, that is counting and objectivity, is part of the creeping professionalization of the academy. What should be in place, I would say, is the honest and full use of individual judgment by professors who sit on committees. Each committee member should be concerned for quality only, quality understood by the member's own lights, however bright or idiosyncratic those lights might be. When a candidate's work is simply put against a set of boxes to be checked, university life and the academic mission of the university are diminished.